You're either with this family, or you're against us, my mom proclaimed loudly at Christmas. All because I refused to hand over my inheritance to help my sister chase her dream. I remained silent, just stood up, grabbed my keys, and by morning, their mortgage, credit lines, and business account were all frozen. I, 29M, learned that money truly shows you who people are, especially when you're the one who has it. Growing up, I always knew my younger sister was the golden child. She got the bigger room, the newer clothes, the first car, and most importantly, she got my parents' unwavering support for every wild idea that popped into her head. I was the reliable one, the one who worked summers at 15 to buy my own things while she spent those same summers at expensive art camps. When our grandfather passed away 3 years ago, he left me his entire estate, $2 million plus his investment properties. Not a penny to anyone else in the family. The will was crystal clear, and his lawyer explained that Grandpa had watched how the family dynamics played out over the years. He saw who worked hard and who expected handouts. My parents were furious, my sister was devastated, and I was honestly shocked. Grandpa and I were close, but I never expected this. What I didn't know was that this inheritance would eventually become the weapon I'd use to destroy the very people who raised me. The money sat mostly untouched in investment accounts. I kept working at my engineering job, bought a modest house, and lived below my means. Meanwhile, my sister bounced between career ideas like a pinball. First it was photography, then interior design, then she wanted to start a food truck, then a boutique. Each venture lasted about 6 months before she moved on to the next shiny object. My parents funded every single attempt, draining their retirement savings and taking out a second mortgage on their house. Last month, my sister announced her newest dream. She wanted to move to Los Angeles and become an influencer. Not just any influencer, but a lifestyle guru who would teach people about authentic living. She had it all planned out. A year-long lease on a luxury apartment in West Hollywood, professional photography equipment, a wardrobe budget, and living expenses while she built her brand. The total cost would be around $300,000. When she first told me about it over dinner, I could see the expectation in her eyes. She kept glancing at our parents, then back at me, waiting for me to volunteer to fund this latest fantasy. I simply nodded and said it sounded interesting, then changed the subject. The disappointment on her face was obvious, but I'd learned years ago that saying no directly only led to arguments and guilt trips that could last for hours. 2 weeks later, my parents invited me over for what they called a family meeting. I should have known what was coming, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they wanted to discuss Grandpa's birthday celebration or plan a family vacation. Instead, I walked into an intervention. The moment I sat down in their living room, my mother launched into a prepared speech about family loyalty and how blood should always come first. She talked about how my sister had so much potential and just needed one good opportunity to prove herself. My father nodded along, occasionally adding comments about how I'd been blessed with Grandpa's inheritance and how that came with responsibilities to the family. My sister sat there looking victimized, dabbing at her eyes with tissues as if I'd already refused to help her. She kept talking about how this was different from her other ventures, how she'd really thought this through, and how she'd already started building a following online. When I asked to see this following she'd built, she got defensive and said she was waiting until she got to LA to really launch her content. They had it all figured out. I would give her the $300,000. She would become Instagram famous within a year, and then she'd pay me back with interest. It was a foolproof plan, according to them. When I asked what would happen if this venture failed like all the others, the room went silent. Then my mother's expression hardened. That's when she stood up and delivered the line that would change everything between us forever. She told me I was either with this family or against it, and that my refusal to help my sister chase her dream showed exactly where my loyalties lay. Her voice echoed through the house as she proclaimed that this was about more than money. It was about whether I truly loved my sister and wanted to see her succeed. I sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. My own mother had essentially issued me an ultimatum: fund my sister's latest fantasy or be considered an enemy of the family. After 29 years of being the responsible one, the one who worked hard and saved money and never asked for handouts, I was being treated like a villain for not handing over hundreds of thousands of dollars. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to explain my perspective or defend my decision. I simply stood up, grabbed my keys from the coffee table, and walked out of their house. Behind me, I could hear my mother calling after me, her tone shifting from angry to panicked as she realized I wasn't going to engage in the fight she'd been expecting. That night, I sat in my home office and did some research. Over the years, I'd helped my parents with various financial situations. When my father's small business struggled during the recession, I'd co-signed on a business loan. When they needed to refinance their house, I provided the down payment and backed their mortgage as a guarantor. When my mother wanted to renovate their kitchen, I'd given them access to a line of credit using my assets as collateral. I'd done all of this quietly, without fanfare, because I thought that's what family did for each other. What I discovered as I went through old paperwork was that I wasn't just a co-signer on these loans. I was actually the primary guarantor on almost everything. My parents' house, my father's business equipment, even the credit cards they'd used to fund my sister's previous ventures were all backed by my assets. Legally speaking, I had the right to call in these debts at any time. I spent the weekend thinking about what my mother had said, either with the family or against it. She'd made it clear that I was now considered an enemy simply because I wouldn't fund another one of my sister's pipe dreams. If that's how they wanted to play it, then I'd show them what being against the family really looked like. Monday morning, I contacted my attorney and had him review all the financial arrangements I'd made with my parents over the years. By Tuesday afternoon, I had a clear picture of exactly how much leverage I had. Wednesday morning, I made the calls that would change everything. The first call was to the bank that held their mortgage. As the primary guarantor, I had the right to demand immediate payment of the full balance. I exercised that right. The second call was to the lending institution that had financed my father's business equipment. Same situation, same result. The third call was to the credit card companies. Every single account that I'd guaranteed was now in immediate default. By Thursday morning, my parents' mortgage was frozen pending full payment. Their business accounts were locked while the bank reviewed the loan status. Every credit line they'd used to fund my sister's ventures was suspended. In less than 72 hours, I had effectively cut off every source of financing they had. My phone started ringing Thursday afternoon. First my father, then my mother, then my sister, all of them wanting to know what was happening with their accounts. I let every call go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk to them yet, and honestly, I wanted them to feel the same panic and uncertainty they'd put me through during that family meeting. The voicemails were illuminating. My father's first message was confused and worried, asking if there had been some kind of banking error. By his third message, he'd figured out what had happened and was begging me to call him back. My mother's messages started angry and demanding, then became increasingly desperate as she realized the scope of what I'd done. My sister's messages were pure panic from the beginning, crying about how I was ruining her life and destroying her dreams. Friday morning, I finally called them back. I told my father that I'd received my mother's message loud and clear. She'd said I was either with the family or against it, and I'd chosen to be against it. Since I was now considered an enemy, I saw no reason to continue guaranteeing their debts or providing them with financial support. He tried to explain that my mother had been emotional, that she didn't mean what she'd said, that this was all a misunderstanding. I listened patiently, then reminded him that this wasn't just about one conversation. This was about 29 years of being treated like a bank account with legs. Every family gathering ended with someone asking me for money. Every conversation with my sister eventually turned into a pitch for her latest venture. Even my parents' phone calls usually included some mention of their financial struggles and how much they could use help. When he asked what it would take for me to reverse the loan calls, I told him it was simple. I wanted a formal apology from each member of the family, acknowledging how they'd treated me over the years. I wanted my mother to publicly admit that her ultimatum was inappropriate and hurtful. And most importantly, I wanted an ironclad agreement that no one in the family would ever ask me for money again, for any reason, no matter the circumstances. The silence on the other end of the phone told me everything I needed to know. He couldn't give me what I was asking for because it would require admitting that they'd been wrong, and more importantly, it would mean giving up their access to my money permanently. Update 1. The weekend brought a parade of flying monkeys. My aunt called to tell me I was being unreasonable and that family should forgive and forget. My cousin sent long text messages about how I was letting money corrupt me and turn me against the people who loved me. Even my grandmother got involved, calling to say she was disappointed in how I was handling this situation. What was interesting was that none of these people offered to help my parents with their financial crisis. They were all very concerned about family unity and forgiveness, but when it came to actually stepping up with real support, they were nowhere to be found. It was easy for them to lecture me about being generous when it wasn't their money on the line. My sister tried a different approach. She showed up at my office on Monday afternoon, crying and begging me to reconsider. She swore that this time would be different, that she'd really found her calling, and that she just needed one chance to prove herself. When I pointed out that I'd heard these exact words before her photography phase, her interior design phase, her food truck phase, and her boutique phase, she got angry. She accused me of being jealous of her creativity and passion. She said I was bitter because I'd chosen a boring career and a boring life, while she was brave enough to chase her dreams. Then she played her final card, telling me that our grandfather would be ashamed of how I was using his money to hurt the family he loved. That's when I told her something I'd never shared with anyone. The last time I visited Grandpa before he passed away, we had a long conversation about family and money. He told me that he'd watched my parents enable my sister's lack of responsibility for years, and that he was worried about what would happen to her when she couldn't rely on handouts anymore. He said the inheritance wasn't just about rewarding me for being responsible. It was also about forcing the rest of the family to face reality. My sister left my office in tears, but I felt lighter than I had in weeks. For the first time in my adult life, I told a family member exactly what I thought without worrying about their reaction or trying to spare their feelings. Update 2. 3 weeks after I froze their accounts, my parents requested a family meeting. This time, it was held at a neutral location, a conference room at my attorney's office. They brought their own lawyer, which told me they were finally taking this seriously. The meeting was tense but civil. My mother did apologize for the ultimatum she'd given me, admitting that it was inappropriate and hurtful. My father acknowledged that they'd become too dependent on my financial support and that it wasn't fair to expect me to fund every crisis or venture that arose. My sister's apology was less convincing. She said she was sorry for taking my generosity for granted, but she spent most of her time defending her various business attempts and insisting that the LA influencer plan was different from all the rest. Even in the middle of apologizing, she was still trying to sell me on funding her dream. Their lawyer had prepared a proposal for repayment of the loans I'd called in. They would sell their house and downsize to something more affordable, liquidate my father's business equipment, and use the proceeds to pay down the debts. The timeline would be 6 months, and they'd accept a structured payment plan for the remaining balance. My attorney had prepared a counteroffer. I would allow them to keep their house if they agreed to a complete financial separation going forward. No more loans, no more guarantees, no more bailouts. They would refinance everything in their own names within 60 days, removing me from all financial obligations. In exchange, I would forgive the accrued interest and penalty fees from the loan defaults. The catch was that this agreement would include my sister. She would be required to sign a document stating that she understood she would receive no financial support from me, ever, for any reason. No loans, no gifts, no investments in her ventures, nothing. My sister balked at this condition. She argued that it was unreasonable to expect her to give up any chance of family financial support forever, especially when she was so close to making it big as an influencer. She kept insisting that this venture was different, that she'd learned from her mistakes, and that she just needed one more chance. That's when I realized that nothing had really changed. Even facing the complete collapse of their financial stability, my sisters still believe she was entitled to my money for her latest scheme. Even with their house potentially being sold out from under them, she was more concerned about preserving her access to funding than about taking responsibility for her choices. I told them they had 48 hours to decide. Either they accepted my terms completely, including my sister's agreement to never ask me for money again, or I would proceed with forcing the sale of their assets to satisfy the debts they owed me. Update 3. My mother called me the next evening to accept the terms, but she had one request. She wanted to know if there was any way my sister could be excluded from the financial separation agreement. She suggested that my sister was still young and might need family support in the future for legitimate emergencies, not just business ventures. I asked my mother to define the difference between a legitimate emergency and a business venture, given that my sister had previously claimed that each of her failed attempts was essential to her survival and happiness. When my mother couldn't give me a clear answer, I knew that they still didn't understand the fundamental problem. The issue wasn't just about money. It was about a family dynamic where I was expected to be the responsible one who worked hard and saved money, while also being the generous one who funded everyone else's choices without question. It was about my sister being taught that she could take unlimited risks because someone else would always catch her when she fell. I told my mother that the terms were non-negotiable. If they wanted to resolve this situation, everyone in the family had to agree that the bank of me was permanently closed. No exceptions, no emergency clauses, no future reconsiderations. 24 hours before the deadline, they signed the agreement. My parents would refinance their house and business equipment within 60 days, removing me from all obligations. My sister signed a document acknowledging that she would never request financial assistance from me for any reason. In exchange, I forgave the penalty fees and gave them a favorable interest rate on the short-term financing they needed to complete the refinancing process. Update 4. 6 months have passed since that Christmas confrontation, and the family dynamics have shifted in ways I never expected. My parents successfully refinanced their house and my father's business equipment. Without the safety net of my guaranteed backing, they had to present much stronger financial documentation to qualify for the loans. This process forced them to take a hard look at their spending habits and create a realistic budget for the first time in years. My sister's influencer career lasted exactly 3 weeks. Without my funding, she couldn't afford the Los Angeles apartment or the professional equipment she'd planned to use. Instead, she moved back in with my parents and got a job at a local marketing firm. Surprisingly, she's actually shown some aptitude for social media marketing in a professional context. Having to work for someone else's brand has taught her skills she never developed while chasing her own scattered dreams. The most unexpected change has been in my relationship with my parents. Without the constant undercurrent of financial dependence, our conversations have become more genuine. My mother no longer hints about their mortgage payments, and my father doesn't mention his business expenses every time we talk. We can actually have discussions about our lives, our interests, and our relationships without the shadow of money hanging over everything. There's still tension, particularly with my sister. She clearly resents the financial separation agreement and has made several comments about how I'm being petty and holding grudges. She still believes that her various business ideas were legitimate opportunities that deserved family support. But she hasn't directly asked me for money, which suggests the agreement is serving its purpose. The most telling moment came last month at my cousin's wedding. My sister mentioned to several family members that she was considering leaving her marketing job to start a podcast about entrepreneurship and personal growth. In the past, this announcement would have been followed by immediate family discussions about funding and support. Instead, there was an awkward silence as everyone realized that she would have to figure out how to make this work on her own. Later that evening, I overheard my aunt telling my mother that perhaps it was good for my sister to have to be more self-reliant, and that maybe my approach had been harsh but necessary. Even some of the flying monkeys who had initially criticized me were starting to see that forcing my sister to take responsibility for her choices might actually help her grow up. I don't regret what I did. That Christmas ultimatum showed me exactly how my family viewed me, not as a person with my own goals and limitations, but as a resource to be exploited whenever they needed funding for their various schemes. My mother's declaration that I was either with the family or against them was meant to guilt me into compliance, but instead it gave me the clarity I needed to establish healthy boundaries. The inheritance from my grandfather wasn't just money, it was a test. It revealed everyone's true character, including my own. For years, I had enabled my family's financial irresponsibility by always being willing to step in and solve their problems. I thought I was being generous and supportive, but I was actually preventing them from learning to handle their own challenges. Sometimes being against someone's destructive patterns is the most loving thing you can do for them. My sister is finally learning skills that will serve her throughout her life. My parents have created a sustainable budget and are living within their means. And I'm no longer treated like a walking ATM by the people who are supposed to love me unconditionally. The money is still sitting in investment accounts, growing steadily. Sometimes I think about what my grandfather would say about how this all played out. I believe he would be proud that I used his gift to teach our family the lessons he tried to teach them himself. That money is earned through hard work and discipline, and that real love doesn't come with financial strings attached. Christmas is coming again soon, and I've been invited to spend it with my family. This will be the first holiday gathering since the confrontation that changed everything. I'm curious to see how different it feels to sit around their table knowing that no one is calculating how they can get me to fund their next venture. For the first time in my adult life, I'll just be their son and brother, not their backup plan.